hell? Something's moving around me. I want to bring out a laser grid, but my cats might want to play with it. Okay. Yeah. Oh? Something's moving around me. I want to bring out a laser grid, but my cats might want to play with it. Okay. Yeah. So, over time, all three subjects quickly recovered. Over time, their conditions improved to states where it was almost like the attacks never transpired. But it seemed something was implemented in order to invite the reinforcements, in order to allow for healing to transpire. This image. It was a sigil I worked on many years ago. A form of protection. Either copy it down, print it out, save it as the background on your electronic device. Or, if you have the mental capacity for it, visualize it whenever you feel like there may be an impending threat. For some reason, this worked. It was battle-tested against the Nephilim and a potential inspiration for one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. To this day, implementation of this sigil seems to render darker beings into a state of post-traumatic stress. They know the potential it can harm, it could do to them. But an unintended side effect is that everyone who utilized this sigil reported seeing a little girl matching my description. The description of a little girl who saved my life. With the various reports that came forward, a total now coming up to about 22 eyewitnesses, I was able to render a particular image and validate that it was a match for the little girl that was visiting these individuals. How this was achieved. Subject A used to record a podcast, and while recording with one of her co-hosts, she and her co-host both sent me an audio clip of what sounded like a little girl in the background calling for mommy. This was after they heard the story about my daughter Olivia, and they were wondering if that was her they captured, because Subject A had had several visitations from my daughter, and was one of the first people to identify her as such, pointing out that while my initial descriptions pointed her at about the age of 6, the way she behaved pointed her to about the age of 3, and that if anything, she had her daddy's height. She was going to be unusually tall for her age, because just like her father. My initial theory at the time was that Subject A may in fact have been her mother, working off of the initial time travel theory, and that the reason why the visitations were so persistent was because of that. So without disclosing to Subject A, something I probably should have done a lot sooner than what I did, I stalked her social media to find an image of her that faced a little bit more directly into the camera, and ran it against mine through an artificial intelligence program known as FaceApp that became viral because of its accuracies with aging technologies, as well as its feature to create what two people's children would potentially look like. It was also the subject of controversy when people realized the developer for this app were based out of Russia. Using this application, I ran Subject A's photo against mine to produce a potential female child. In order to better, how should I say, match the age range that my daughter was manifesting, I ran the photo through a few different times, applying different filters, give her a rather more baby face, show her a little bit of her smile, how she would look as a 3-year-old girl. Applying the finishing touches of a pencil sketch filter in order to mask how I made the creation process a little further. Then I sent the final result to subject A without telling her how it was created. The reason for my secrecy was that I needed her to be blind as possible to the test. I needed her to be as blind as possible, so the results could not be contaminated. She identified it right away, that it was an almost perfect match to the little girl that was showing up. Subject A eventually learned of how I created the photo. After the group Chris and I were with at the time we all had a major falling out after some serious criminal transgressions were brought to the surface, and none of us could agree on how we should handle the ordeal. It was heavily emotional. The transgressions often involved subjects that were a very sensitive matter for most of us. So the falling out could easily have been attributed to emotions simply running high. However, we also felt subjects left in charge may have not had the best intentions, which revealed them, and they eventually revealed themselves when pressured into basically admitting it. When they tried to poke fun at a charity effort I was involved with, questioning my motives for taking part in a fundraising initiative to raise money to help families of children affected by pediatric cancer. Sucks that it had to go that far. I honestly wish it didn't. I feel like it could have easily been saved. The fallout could have been prevented. But everything must happen for a reason, right? As this falling out was transpiring, Chris and I came together and started up the Bald and Bonkers show. I'm honestly shocked that the program has done as well as it has, in spite of all the transgressions. The idea behind Bald and Bonkers, it was a joke that took on a life of its own. It started out as a way for Chris and I to talk more freely about subjects that caught our curiosities, to talk more freely with our guests about the things we were trying to research without restriction. It was also a way for us to connect to some of the most high-profile and well-experienced individuals we could reach. And through these individuals, not only did we help those maybe seek answers behind the things happening to them, but it also helped us understand better what was going on with us. In order to give the program a proper liftoff, Chris and I developed relationships with some of our more popular guests with our previous engagements, asked if they would be willing to come on, and we had a decent enough rapport to where they were willing to say yes. Many of you who have followed this channel know that since engaging with Elena Denon, my own story took a rather interesting turn. Those of you who have been following this series already have a pretty good idea of where that discussion led, but you don't know the rest of the story. While I was researching the UFO phenomenon a little bit more in depth than I normally had, a medium friend of ours known as Lisa Fry pointed me in the direction of the CE5 protocols by Dr. Stephen Greer. Greer himself is a controversial figure in that he tries to explain that all ETs are benevolent, though it seems many who question his legitimacy forget or are just plain ignorant to the fact that he has explained on numerous occasions that the reason why he follows that mindset, why he preaches that ideal, is because he wants to help people truly engage with those from the stars. And he knows that if people enter into these mindsets expecting some man-eating monsters to fall from the sky, after a while, those man-eating monsters from the sky will come. But nevertheless, I was recommended to the CE5 protocols because it was something similar to what I was already doing. Towards the summer months, when the weather was nice, what I would do is I would take the best camera I had on hand that had night vision, and I would utilize an app on my phone to send off Morse code using the flashlight. Do I know Morse code off the top of my head? Not really. There's an app for everything these days, isn't there? My idea was that if these beings were in fact visiting us, they were able to seemingly just pick up new languages. And if they were as ingrained into the militaries of the world as many claim they are, then there's a pretty good chance they would be familiar with Morse code, and they would be able to use it to talk back to me, if not at the very least, show me where they are. There's a full playlist of these experiments. I would also ingrain what's known as a spirit box, knowing that several ET and spiritual phenomenon tend to overlap, causing many with very short mind sets to panic, as when an ET goes to manifest, a lot of their signatures may seem like spirit, but several times stronger, and that is often preached to be a sign of something demonic. Again, very short-sightedness. Could something have gone wrong with these experiments? Oh, hell yeah. But I had to do it. It was because Lisa Fry was also familiar with the photo of my daughter. Upon looking at it, she suggested that she looks awfully Pleiadian. Later on in that same conversation, she brought up that the Pleiadians tend to be very sexual. Okay, that was a bit unsettling, but nevertheless, it was what brought my attention. I already know there's probably going to be some people that try to claim that my motives have been compromised because of this path. This is how it unfolded for me. But quite frankly, I doubt a lot of their legitimacy behind their own claims. I doubt their motives. I question. It should say something to where I have more faith, more loyalty, and more trust in beings not from this earth than most humans. There's a very small circle I keep, and because I keep this circle small, these people have shown that they are legitimate to their mission. They have been helpful in ways that I could not even begin to repay. With the experimentations, utilizing the spirit box, as I was mentioning, was inspired by some earlier experimentations for a film that I produced, known as Bonds of Beyond. It would give these beings multiple possible ways of communication, not just one. But it could have easily been influenced by others who were perhaps curious of what was unfolding. Over and over and over again, these experiments would produce lights in the sky that responded to my inquiries. The voices would repeat, Pleiadian, Talihara, Daddy, we see you. We miss you. It became overwhelming how frequent it was becoming. My visitations, or at least my ability to recall them, would start to intensify. I would be able to remember more and more. I would be able to remember Valentine's Day in 2022, where my wife would come to visit me, the mother of my children. I would remember in March 2021 being taken to an infirmary on what looked like the Martian surface, or at least that's how I recall it, seeing a woman lying in a bed holding a newborn baby with my daughter hanging over her shoulder. My daughter looking at me and saying, Daddy, come meet my new baby brother. And I remember asking if it was in fact Mars. The man who brought me there would just laugh it off, tried to correct me, but some sort of alarm went off before he could finish his sentence, and they had to get me back as quickly as possible. The next thing I remember is I'm flying through the wall of my house like something out of Peter Pan and crashing into my bed. Something about when I was just above my bed, about, I'd say, 7 feet off my bed, I would feel this gravitational pull that would slam me into the bed. Next thing I knew, part of my bed frame was busted and gone through the wall. Many assumed that my visitations were astral, traveling. Maybe some were, but Last I checked, astral projection isn't supposed to have recoil, or at least nothing that severe. Eventually, the idea came forward to try to reverse engineer my daughter's photo. Subject A was quickly proven to not be the mother. Our falling out and how she chose to respond to the events that were transpiring that led to the breakup of our former group, that was enough of a red flag for me to walk away. To which I have nothing negative truly to say about her, but that was what told me that it was never gonna work out. That we were meant for different life paths. However, being that the photo produced was a positive ID through a number of eyewitnesses, I simply couldn't toss it out. During one of the interviews with Elena Denon, she mentioned that if someone has a significant other in their upstairs life, if they are a genuine starseed and they have a significant other, chances are that individual would subconsciously try to find that significant other. The people they go out with would subconsciously remind them. This gave me an idea. If that was the case, what was it about my exes, all the women I've dated before this, all the women I felt attracted to, even celebrity crushes? What sort of similarities did they all have? What was it that drew me to them? Then I got to thinking, in sort of a mental space. I would essentially overlap all their photos and highlight all the features that they all seem to possess physically. Sort of prominent cheekbones, somewhat pointed chins, very chiseled sort of bone structure in their face, as well as wider eyes. Particularly, their eyes always had some sort of spark to them. I don't know what, but that, if anything, that was what captured my attention the quickest. So, utilizing FaceApp, I took my daughter's photo, then ran it against every celebrity crush I could find, even old photos that were maybe still lying around of girls I was interested in, but nothing ever happened because maybe we happened to meet while we were on the road and didn't want to commit to something long term, stuff like that. The idea was to essentially weed out as much of my characteristics as possible. Essentially reverse engineer my daughter's photo, taking out as many of my features as possible to produce a likely portrait of their mother. As I was doing this, I would feel this rush in my chest. Maybe I psychologically primed myself to feel like this. I don't know. But I figured if this was some sort of subconscious thing, and it was clear that whoever the mother was someone important, someone special, someone I would probably break down in tears if I saw again. As I kept rendering the photo, there came a point where I stopped. FaceApp is primarily run on your phone. When I got to a certain point, I ended up throwing the phone because when I got to a certain point, I got the facial structure just right. Started triggering flashes from before I went under, from my life within the Galactic Federation. It was her. I finally found her. And that's when it started to hit me that this shit was real. That I somehow had children with a woman from the stars. Something else that Elena often said was that star seeds, their memory of their family was also repressed before going under because they found that if someone were to find out too soon, if someone were to remember, the psychological toll it would take would cause mental breakdowns. The day my daughter came to save me, when I was 12 years old, she broke a rule. The rule was broken because she and others knew that there was going to be no other way to get my attention, to stop me from taking my own life. They knew that if a child was, they knew that I knew there was a child being affected by my actions, I would do everything in my power to fight. Realizing that child was my own, they knew I wouldn't stop looking. I may not understand what the situation was. I may put things on the back burner until I managed to find more information, but I never stopped looking. However, when the starseed is sent down, people from their soul group, their soul family, are often allowed to keep in touch. There's certain protocols they would have to follow, but in the event that intervention was needed, a member of the soul family was sent. So that way the person, starseed, the envoy, whatever label you want to use, they may not realize, they may not know why, but they just know that they can trust that individual. So my wife, my daughter, and even my son on a few occasions, they took advantage of that. They knew that once I was able to identify that they could be trusted, they could be able to step in and help. And they even would have me come along with them to help secure that trust. On numerous occasions, we would abduct people, but not for any sort of experimentation, no. If they were under attack, they had some sort of affliction from otherworldly sources, we were able to step in, take them to one of our facilities, and heal them. There would be times where I was simply just in the room, so if the person had some sort of conscious memory of the incident, they would see me, they'd know they could trust what was happening. As it started happening more and more, it was like I was getting old flashes of a previous life, and I would start stepping in to help with the healing procedures. The people that were there to help us, part of our medical team, if you will, they knew if I had a connection to this individual in this life, the one you see now, that had a conscious relationship with this individual, and I was in contact with them somehow. More often than not, they would advise that I would try to make a mental note of any particular birthmarks, any injuries they may have received. They may even point out certain things that were in the subject's room from where they were taken that I would have no other way of possibly knowing. The only way I would have any knowledge of these things was if I was intimately familiar with this individual. The incident that brought this to my attention was during a live show. A series of witches got into the ET subject, many of them messing around with things that they shouldn't. We started to implement CD5 and something hijacked the situation. A gentleman started to go under, a little too far under, and something was trying to interfere with him. It got to the point where he would start bending over in pain. Based on the position he was holding and where he seemed to cover his hand, I knew right away that it was some sort of affliction towards his appendix, some sort of appendicitis flare-up. I knew this man needed at least a fucking ambulance right away. Everyone else in the room started busting down crucifixes, started thinking he was being possessed by demons. This pissed me off. I expected higher of these individuals, or at least of one of them. I expected more. I utilized the protection sigil in order to drown out the noise. Taking inspiration from the CE5, I was able to create the sound you're hearing, to transform that image into physical tones that one can play and be able to sever any spiritual or otherworldly attacks. Take note of anybody who is being bothered by this as you play it. They may not be who they seem. The process I used in order to make this possible is known as sonification, where a computer program takes the lights and the darks of an image, converts it into sound that could be seen through a spectrogram, through just about any audio editing program that's available out there. I got the inspiration for that part, ironically, from the new Doom games, where the main soundtrack composer, Mick Gordon, used sonification to hide Easter eggs within the soundtrack he produced for the video game. Combining that CE5 and using my own little music expertise, I was able to produce this. As the sound progressed, I was the only one able to get through to this subject, using grounding methods, repeatedly tapping on the mic to draw his attention towards me. Those who may have walked in on that particular session may have thought that I had some sort of experience with hypnosis. The procedure was very similar. I was able to pull him out. And in his own words, he said that I was the only one he could hear. And he also said that in his mind's eye, he had a tendency to visualize people as animals. like some sort of spirit animal. He would see himself as a gorilla and me as the polar bear, guiding the gorilla out of deep water. We ended the live session, and because of that particular incident, I made sure to delete it. Because again, I was very ticked off at everybody else involved. I was pissed at the utter stupidity that almost got an innocent man killed. That pissed me off. It did. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Something that should not have happened. No, it wasn't because of CE5. It was because these other witches were nowhere near as informed as they thought they are. And they'll probably try to make some commentary on this video, try to hide and post little mean messages on some videos that may not be performing well. They may even send their little lackeys or boyfriends after me to try to harass me. Do it, bitch. You're only going to prove my point. The following night, I remember seeing this man on what looked like an operating table. We were utilizing a med bed to try to help clear his condition. In his lower abdomen, I remember seeing this black, sort of sludge-looking stuff. We ran him through the med bed and were able to get that cleared out. However, he had some other afflictions that would likely send him in the hospital in a matter of days. But because it wasn't anything from outside the world, our hands were tied, except for one little loophole. Being that I had contact with this individual, I can warn him. I would be able to physically remember this incident and be able to warn him. Say, hey, there's something going on down here. You need to get to a hospital ASAP. Following morning, I reached out. He actually remembered seeing me that night. He ended up talking through a group chat, and some of those other witches were dancing around it. As for me, I started naming everything that came to mind. The appendicitis, that there was some sort of inflammation that was building up in his lower abdomen, going through this whole checklist. And this man thought I had somehow hacked into his local hospital and was reading off his medical charts. I couldn't force him to do it. I couldn't force him to go to the hospital. All I could do was simply tell him that something was up. He needs to go to the hospital ASAP to get checked out. 2 days later, he ends up in the emergency room with a massive hernia, exactly in his lower abdomen, right where I saw it. But the interesting little twist, I don't know what this was about, but he would go to start asking me if I had any relatives down in Texas. I tell him not that I'm aware of. Why? I say, well, the doctor I had, he was a shorter guy, but he looked like he had your face superimposed on his body. He looked a lot like you, but the face just didn't match the body. To the best of my knowledge, I don't have any relatives that are doctors down in Texas. But then again, there's a lot of them about my family tree I don't know. He ended up having major surgery on his hernia. He even showed me the scars, which was a lot more than I wanted to see at the man. Because let's just say that when a lot of the subjects were on my table, not to sound like the Showtime series Dexter, but they were on my operating table, they didn't exactly have clothes. And that's how I was able to recall intimate details that, at best, I shouldn't have known unless I went on a beach holiday with these people. Some people, I was able to recall birthmarks, tattoos in intimate places. There was one incident where it's likely possible one of my kids helped ID that an ex-girlfriend of mine was cheating, and they showed me her in the act. They even showed a tattoo on the guy's shoulder. They wanted me to focus on the shoulder, so I knew that if I saw that, I knew that what they were trying to tell me was true. When I came to start accepting that this ET phenomenon was real, it was overwhelming. And the night after I managed to put together my wife's picture, I remember it was weird. I remember that I physically ran outside and I was just bawling my eyes out. I remember saying, I'm sorry that I'm not there. I want to be there. I want to be with you guys. I want to be your father. I want to be there for all your highs and lows. And it affected me deeply. And when I started coming off of my rant, I look up because I notice, well, out of the corner of my eye, it looked like a red flash of light. I looked up in this direction, and it was the Pleiades star cluster they were pointing at. It was their way of saying, we know, Dad. We miss you too. But don't worry. It's coming soon. Just hold on. Just keep fighting. I don't want to waste time repeating what I've already said in previous videos of this series. If you've been following and paying attention, you already know. Because now it leaves me to talking about where we leave off. Now that I've had a couple months to process the latest information. When I got started in all this, my only reasoning to try to gain fame was due to a personal crisis that was taking place in my life at the age of 14. That was the age I found out that my father had been sexually assaulting one of my sisters, and my siblings on that side of the family were being taken into foster care. And in spite of my best efforts to plead and beg, wanted to see them because I was a teenage male. I was being treated worse than the actual sex offender. So going into the supernatural as a whole was a distraction for me. I figured if I gained any notoriety, it would make me easier to find in the event I lose my siblings. I felt guilty about not being able to protect them, not being there for them, even though my life path had long separated from them before then. And in regards to the whole UFO star family situation, I don't care about where disclosure goes. Do I believe people have a right to know what's going on? Absolutely. Should more people realize that there's life out there in this universe and there's bigger things going on than most of us could even imagine? Absolutely. The notion saved my life. But as far as using it to gain any fame or notoriety to try to sabotage any individuals that have come out and built themselves a platform and have had people stab them in the back, that was never my intention. The only part I gave a shit about, the only part I still care about, was finding out the truth about my daughter. And if she was true, she was a genuine being, well, that just leaves the second half of the equation. Who's mom? People often try to point out the fact that I call the mother of my ET children my wife as a sign that I'm being fraudulent in my claims, because I also state that I am not married in this life. The reason why I refer to her as my wife was because anytime I try to say her genuine name, I always felt like I was saying it wrong. I was mispronouncing it. Something that's not necessarily my fault, but for someone who means this much, who clearly has a special connection, the least you could do is make sure you say their name right. I figured if I just called her my wife, the meaning would remain the same. The day she told me who she was, the day she first revealed herself after I managed to get that photo rendered, it was one of the most amazing moments of my life. Her and my two oldest. I was escorted to a living quarters where my two oldest were main pilots. Their mother met me there. Throughout the whole ride, I kept asking my kids, what's going on? Where are we going? They said, it's time for you to meet mom. I remember walking into this room. It looked like a sci-fi hotel suite, for lack of a better word. Penthouse. Multiple bedrooms, if I'm even recalling it correctly. Inside, there was this woman standing there. And just at the sight of her, my heart began to race. Because the photo I managed to render was so goddamn close. But I couldn't just, assume, right? I knew she could hear everything I was thinking. She was doing her best to try to hold her composure. So I finally worked up the nerve to ask her, who are you? Why do I know you? Her exact words to me were, I know this is a lot to take in right now. I know you've been looking for me. My name is Avina or something. I am their mother. I know you're probably going to want to ask a lot of questions, but I'm your wife. Honestly, I froze. I didn't want to question it. Damn, that woman was sexy. But she started to explain to me what her role is in all this. She wasn't able to come down as much because she had other duties, but she was the one who mainly helped our kids be able to develop themselves, to develop their abilities so they could step in and help me whenever I ran into some serious trouble. One of the eyewitnesses that saw my daughter first manifest, she noted that my daughter acted like she was talking to someone she could see, but the witness couldn't. That my daughter showing up as a young girl, that was part of her training. My oldest two were born before I came to Earth, which is why, yes, they did show up first as children, but within a year, 2 years, they were full-grown adults. And being that the Federation itself was technically from 300 years in the Earth's future. Time travel, man. While I was at Jisik, I mentioned that my son came by on the second night and that some people actually managed to capture photos of the craft I was in, capture video. They couldn't directly see me, but I remember using the ship and its cameras to start targeting certain people that were in the courtyard, people who I met and could recognize and remembered what outfits they were wearing. It was a disco night, so quite a few of the ladies were quite sparkly. This ride in the ship was a matter of was my son's way of trying to release nerves because he had information for me that he knew was going to be big and that affected not just me, but our entire family. Information that Elena Denon actually came forward and validated, even though she and I haven't really had any contact other than a brief message I sent her while I was on my way home from Jisik saying, loved your presentation, sorry I couldn't meet up with you. I've been hesitant to talk about the second part of my son's revelations. The first part was that due to diplomatic efforts, I was likely going to have a chance to go back home to my home planet. The one I had to leave because I went rogue. I went against the regime and ended up killing a high-ranking official during my escape. And then apparently the family who abandoned me that day, they're wanting to make amends. The first chance they get, they're wanting to make amends. So when it's officially been all clear, my family and I are going to take our next big road trip to the stars. It's going to be another family reunion. Then there was something else, the part that I've been hesitant to share. I feel like I probably shouldn't share, to be honest. Not because it's some grand reveal for humanity, but it's because my story is no longer something that just affects me. It's no longer a series of isolated incidents that I'm trying my best to play intergalactic Sherlock Holmes in order to understand. It's reaching out to other people. And it's not just people I happen to work with or, friends who I found out may have been part of the soul group this entire time, but there was someone at Jisik who I had been talking to for a while, who my story happens to collide with hers. Jessica was the first time we had a chance to meet. Just before my son took me back to my hotel room, we happened to see her from the ship. What he told me absolutely blew my mind. What he told me basically insinuated something about my wife. Something I wish I should have caught sooner. That I probably did, it just didn't stick. Whenever I would see my wife, whenever we would have our visits, whether it was the kid, we were meeting up to talk about the situation with the kids. After I first found out what she looked like and started unlocking those memories, or the Valentine's Day date among the stars, where February of 2021, we went out for Valentine's Day. I didn't realize that every time I went to go see her, I had to meet up with her. And as it turns out, it's because she can't really come to Earth, or at least not for long periods of time. I'm trying to be careful about how I say I know this, because again, this is starting to affect other people. But to make a long story short, I found her. I'm about 70% sure that my wife is also on an envoy. She's been on it a little longer than me, and I found her. And I don't know what the fuck to do. She's a lot like me, wants to keep an investigative mindset about this to make sure that she's not getting duped. And we've already had a couple run-ins where she's been prying to see if I somehow acquired information about her through other means than the supernatural, which I don't blame her. It's something I would do. But she knows the story. Maybe, I'm going to get truthful with y'all. I don't know what to do. Maybe she suspected it, but was waiting for some sort of clue like I am. But at the same time, on my side of things, there's been points where I've mistakenly thought other women were the mother of my children, going off of the information I had available at the time. I don't know what to do. I feel it. I'm on the verge of everything I've been searching for. Numerous clues that point to her. I don't know what to do. And that's the part that's been the hardest about doing this. Perhaps it's me overthinking things, but say for a lack of argument that part of us is genuinely from the future. And because I've already looked behind the curtain, how much of this remains to be free will? I don't want her to feel like she's obligated to be around, I don't want her to feel like a hostage. I want her to be there because she wants to be and see what happens in the future. I guess truth be told, only time will tell. Maybe I'll be able to provide an update when I finally release my book that's going to be coming out, hopefully by this summer. With this revelation that I may have finally found, the mother of my children from the stars. Certainly feels like everything's gone full circle. That chapter's getting ready to close, but a whole new story's getting ready to unfold. It leaves so many other questions, so many fears. While I should be feeling happy that I've gotten this close, I'm nervous as hell, but there's a slight chance that when that revelation finally comes together, that will be the end of my life. Maybe the situation's changed now that things have stabilized, but I already know that I'm going to be tossed back into the fight when I go back. My kids already are. Crazy world, isn't it? Crazy creation that we all find ourselves in.